Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I was 28 and working as a traveling nurse. My company sent me to rural areas, places that didn't have enough permanent staff. It meant a lot of driving and a lot of temporary housing, but the pay was good and I didn't mind the change of scenery. This assignment was in North Dakota, a small town called Medina, population maybe 300. The clinic there needed someone to cover for a nurse who was out on maternity leave. They put me up in a farmhouse about 5 miles outside of town. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Crenshaw, had moved to an assisted living facility, and the house was empty. The clinic arranged for me to stay there, said it would be more comfortable than a motel. The house was old, but well-maintained. A 2-story structure with white clapboard siding and a big front porch. It sat alone on a flat stretch of land, surrounded by empty fields. The nearest neighbor was miles away. I moved in on a Sunday. The house was clean, furnished with old but sturdy furniture. There was a wood stove in the living room, and the kitchen had everything I needed. It felt cozy, welcoming. I unpacked my things and settled in, looking forward to a quiet month. The storm hit on Wednesday. The forecast had been calling for snow, but nothing like what we got. By evening, the wind was howling and the snow was coming down so hard I couldn't see the barn 50 feet away. The power went out around 8. I lit some candles, stoked the fire in the wood stove, and made myself comfortable on the couch with a book. Around 10, I heard a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and clear. I was surprised. No one should have been out in this weather. I went to the door and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. I looked through the peephole. There was a woman standing on the porch. She was young, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair and a pale face. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin dress. She looked freezing. I opened the door. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't answer, just stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Then she turned and walked off the porch, disappearing into the storm. I called after her, but she was gone. I grabbed my coat and a flashlight and went outside. The wind nearly knocked me over. I swept the flashlight across the yard, but there was no sign of her. No footprints in the snow. Nothing. I went back inside, shaken. I locked the door and sat by the fire, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe she was a neighbor, disoriented by the cold. Maybe I should call someone, but my phone had no signal, and the landline was dead. I was completely cut off. An hour later, I heard the knock again. Same pattern. 3 sharp raps. I went to the door but didn't open it. "Who's there?" Silence. I looked through the peephole. The woman was back, standing in the same spot, wearing the same dress. This time her lips were moving. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to hear. Her voice was faint, barely audible over the wind. "Let me in. Please, I'm so cold." I didn't open the door. Something about her felt wrong. The way she stood so still, the way her eyes didn't blink. I backed away and returned to the living room. The knocking continued, rhythmic and insistent. 3 raps, a pause. 3 more raps. Over and over. I tried to ignore it, but it went on for hours. Around 2 in the morning, the knocking stopped. The house fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. I must have dozed off because I woke suddenly to the sound of footsteps. They were coming from upstairs. Slow, deliberate, moving from room to room. I grabbed a poker from the fireplace and crept to the stairs. The steps creaked as I climbed. At the top, the hallway was dark. I could see 3 doors, all closed. The footsteps had stopped. I opened the first door. It was a bedroom, empty. The second door, a bathroom, also empty. The third door was at the end of the hall. I reached for the handle, and it was ice cold. I turned it slowly and pushed the door open. The room beyond was freezing, colder than the rest of the house. The window was wide open, snow blowing in. And standing in the corner, facing the wall, was the woman. She turned slowly, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. Her skin was blue, her lips cracked and frozen, her eyes were clouded over, lifeless. She opened her mouth, and a sound came out, a low, keening wail that made my blood run cold. I slammed the door and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, in my car, engine running. I drove through the storm, hands shaking, until I reached town. I never went back to that house. The clinic found me a motel room for the rest of my stay. When I told them what happened, they didn't believe me. But when they sent someone to check on the house, they found the upstairs window open, the room covered in snow. And in the corner, written in frost on the wall, were the words, "Why didn't you let me in?" I was driving home from my sister's place in Ashland, Wisconsin, when the storm caught me. It was late February, and I'd stayed longer than I should have, helping her pack for a move to Minneapolis. By the time I left, it was already dark, and the weather reports were calling for heavy snow overnight. I figured I could beat it. I was wrong. About 30 miles outside of Ashland, the snow started falling hard. Within minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. I slowed down, hands gripping the wheel, eyes straining to see the road ahead. The highway was empty. No other cars, no trucks, just me and the snow. Then I missed my turn. I realized it too late after I'd already driven another 10 miles in the wrong direction. I pulled over, trying to get my bearings, but my GPS had lost signal. My phone showed no service. I sat there for a moment, debating whether to turn around or keep going and hope for a town. That's when I saw the logging road. It was just a narrow cut between the trees, barely visible in the snow, but it looked recently used. The snow wasn't as deep there, and I could see faint tire tracks. I figured it might lead to a logging camp or a ranger station, somewhere I could wait out the storm. So I turned onto it. The road was rough, full of potholes and exposed roots. My car bounced and shook as I drove slowly forward, headlights cutting through the darkness. The trees pressed in close on both sides, branches heavy with snow. Every few feet, I'd hear a crack as a branch snapped under the weight and fell somewhere in the darkness. I drove for maybe 20 minutes, following those faint tire tracks. They never seemed to get any clearer, never seemed to get any fresher. Just those same shallow impressions, always just ahead of me. Then the road opened up into a small clearing. In the center was a cabin. It was small, maybe 1 or 2 rooms with a sagging roof and boarded-up windows. No lights, no smoke from the chimney. It looked abandoned. But the tire tracks led right up to it. They circled the cabin once, then stopped at the front door. I sat in my car, engine running, staring at that cabin. Something about it felt wrong. The way it sat there in the clearing, perfectly centered. The way the snow had piled up around it but not on it, like something was keeping it warm from the inside. I should have turned around right then, but I was cold and tired, and the storm was getting worse. I figured I could at least check if the door was unlocked, see if there was a phone or some way to call for help. I turned off the engine and stepped out into the snow. The cold was brutal. It cut through my jacket like it wasn't even there. I hurried to the front door and tried the handle. It was unlocked. The door swung open with a long, low creak. Inside was darkness. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a small room. There was a table, a chair, and a wood stove in the corner. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. It looked like no one had been here in years. But the stove was warm. I held my hand near it and felt heat radiating from the metal. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. I stepped further inside, my breath misting in the cold air. On the table was a piece of paper. I picked it up. It was a map, hand-drawn, showing the logging road and the clearing, but there was something else marked on it. A spot in the woods, just beyond the cabin. Someone had drawn an X there, and next to it, written in shaky handwriting, "Don't dig." I heard a sound behind me. A soft scraping like something being dragged across the floor. I spun around, shining my light toward the back of the cabin. There was a door there, partially open. Beyond it, I could see stairs leading down into darkness, a basement. The scraping sound came again, louder this time, and then a voice, barely a whisper, "Help me." I ran. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I just bolted out of that cabin and back to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, and I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the snow. I backed out of that clearing as fast as I could, not caring about the ruts or the branches scraping against the sides of the car. I followed the logging road back the way I'd come, but it seemed longer now. Darker. The trees seemed to lean in closer, and I kept seeing movement in my peripheral vision. Shadows darting between the trunks. I drove faster, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally reached the highway, I didn't stop. I drove straight through the night, storm or no storm, until I reached a gas station on the outskirts of Duluth. I filled up the tank, bought a coffee, and sat in the parking lot until the sun came up. I never went back to look for that cabin. I don't want to know what was in that basement. If you're still listening, you probably enjoy stories like this. A like or a comment helps keep them alive. I was 31 and working as a sales rep for a medical supply company. My territory covered most of rural Montana, which meant a lot of driving and a lot of nights in cheap motels. I didn't mind it. The solitude suited me, and the work was straightforward. This particular trip, I was heading from Billings to Great Falls, a drive that should have taken about 3 hours. But a winter storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. By the time I was halfway there, the interstate was a mess of ice and blowing snow. I pulled off at the first exit I saw, hoping to find somewhere to wait it out. The exit led to a 2-lane road that cut through empty farmland. No houses, no gas stations, just fields and fence posts disappearing into the white. I drove slowly, scanning for any sign of civilization. After about 10 minutes, I saw a sign, Whispering Pines Motel, 2 miles. The letters were faded, and the sign was crusted with rust, but it was better than nothing. The motel appeared out of the snow like something from another era. It was a long, single-story building with a row of identical doors, each one painted a peeling shade of turquoise. The office was at one end, marked by a flickering neon sign that buzzed in the wind. There were no other cars in the parking lot. No lights in any of the windows. It looked abandoned, but the vacancy sign was lit. I parked near the office and went inside. The interior was warm, almost stifling. A small space heater glowed in the corner, and the air smelled like stale cigarettes and pine air freshener. Behind the counter sat an old man, thin and hunched, with liver-spotted hands and watery eyes. He looked up as I entered, but didn't smile. "Need a room?" I said. He nodded slowly and slid a registration card across the counter. I filled it out, paid in cash, and he handed me a key attached to a large plastic tag. Room 7. "Storm's supposed to get worse," he said. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't used it in a while. "Best stay inside tonight." I thanked him and went back out into the cold. Room 7 was near the middle of the building. The door stuck when I tried to open it, swollen from moisture, but I managed to force it open. Inside was exactly what I expected. A sagging double bed, a dresser with a boxy television on top, and a bathroom with cracked tile. It smelled like mildew and old carpet. I dropped my bag on the bed and locked the door behind me. The heater rattled when I turned it on, but it worked. I cranked it up, peeled off my wet jacket, and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, the wind howled and snow battered the window. I tried the television, only static. I checked my phone. No signal. I wasn't surprised. I decided to take a shower, warm up before trying to get some sleep. The water pressure was weak, but the water was hot, and that was good enough. I stood under the spray, letting the heat soak into my muscles. That's when I heard it. A door slamming. Not mine. Somewhere nearby. Then footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving along the walkway outside. I turned off the water and listened. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I waited, breath held. A shadow appeared in the gap beneath the door. Someone was standing there. I wrapped a towel around myself and crept to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. I could hear breathing, slow and steady. Then a voice, muffled but clear. "You shouldn't have stopped here." I jumped back, heart racing. The shadow moved away, and the footsteps retreated down the walkway. I quickly dressed and grabbed my car keys, ready to leave. But when I looked out the window, my car was gone. The parking lot was empty except for one other vehicle, a rusted pickup truck with no license plates. I threw open the door and ran outside. The cold hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. I searched the parking lot, but my car was nowhere to be seen. No tire tracks, no sign it had ever been there. I ran to the office. The door was locked, the lights off. I pounded on the glass, but no one answered. I went back to my room, locked the door, and pushed the dresser in front of it. I sat on the bed, trying to think. My phone still had no signal. I was stuck. Outside, the storm raged on. Hours passed. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they didn't stop at my door. They went to the room next to mine. I heard a key turning in a lock, a door opening and closing. Then silence. I pressed my ear to the wall. I could hear movement on the other side. Slow, shuffling steps. Then a voice, soft and distant. "Help me." It was a woman's voice, weak and pleading. I knocked on the wall. "Are you okay?" No response, just that same shuffling sound. I grabbed a chair and climbed up to the small window above the door. It looked out onto the walkway. I could see the door to the next room. It was slightly open, a sliver of darkness beyond. As I watched, a figure emerged. It was the old man from the office. He stood in the doorway, looking down at something inside. Then he stepped back, closed the door, and locked it. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the snow. When morning came, the storm had passed. I climbed out the window and walked to the highway. A trucker picked me up and drove me to Great Falls. I reported my car stolen, but the police never found it. Weeks later, I got a call from a detective. They'd found the motel. It had been abandoned for 15 years. No old man, no guests, just empty rooms and rotting furniture. But in room 8, the one next to where I'd stayed, they found something. A woman's suitcase covered in dust. Inside were clothes, a wallet, and a driver's license. The woman's name was Sarah Mitchell. She'd been reported missing in 2008. She was never found. I worked for the Forest Service for 6 years, mostly in Idaho and Montana. It was good work, solitary but peaceful. I spent most of my time maintaining trails, checking on campsites, and keeping an eye out for poachers. In the winter, the work slowed down. Most of the parks closed to visitors, and my job became more about monitoring weather conditions and maintaining the equipment. That winter, I was assigned to a remote ranger tower in the Bitterroot Mountains. It was a 2-week rotation. Just me, a small cabin at the base of the tower, and a radio for emergencies. The tower itself was old, built sometime in the 1950s. It was a tall wooden structure, maybe 60 feet high, with a small observation room at the top. The stairs were narrow and rickety, and the whole thing swayed in the wind. But the view was incredible. On a clear day, you could see for miles, all the way to the peaks of the Selwyn Bitterroot Wilderness. I arrived on a Monday afternoon. The previous ranger, a guy named Holt, met me at the cabin. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, and he barely said a word as he packed his gear. I asked him if everything was okay. I didn't know what he meant, but he left before I could ask. I spent the first few days settling in, familiarizing myself with the equipment and making repairs to the stairs. The weather was cold but clear, and I enjoyed the solitude. At night, I'd sit in the cabin, reading or listening to the radio. Everything was fine until the storm hit. It started snowing on Thursday night. By Friday morning, the world was white. The snow fell steadily, piling up fast. I climbed the tower to check the conditions, and from the observation room, I could see the storm stretching in every direction. It was beautiful, but isolating. I was completely cut off. That night, I heard something on the radio. It wasn't a transmission, just static, but buried in the static was a voice. I tried to respond, but there was no reply. Just that voice, looping endlessly. I turned off the radio and tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside the cabin. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the snow, I grabbed my flashlight and looked out the window. There was nothing there, but the footsteps continued, circling the cabin, around and around, never stopping. I radioed for help, but all I got was static. I grabbed my coat and my gun, a revolver I kept for emergencies, and stepped outside. The footsteps stopped. The snow was thick, undisturbed. No tracks. But the tower, I could see a light in the observation room, a pale, flickering glow. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The higher I went, the colder it got. My breath came out in thick clouds, and my fingers went numb despite my gloves. When I reached the top, the door to the observation room was open. Inside, the light was coming from a lantern, old and rusted, sitting on the desk, but there was no one there. On the desk was a notebook. I opened it. The pages were filled with entries, dated over the past 50 years, different handwriting, different ranges, but they all said the same thing. Don't stay after dark. It wants you to climb. The lantern flickered and went out. In the darkness, I heard breathing, not mine. It was coming from the corner of the room. I turned my flashlight toward it, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. Then the breathing moved. It was behind me now, close enough that I could feel it on the back of my neck. I ran. I didn't care about the slippery stairs or the swaying tower. I just ran, half sliding, half falling down to the ground. I didn't stop until I was back in the cabin, door locked, every light on. I stayed there until morning, gun in hand, listening to that breathing outside the door. When the storm cleared, I hiked out. I didn't wait for my replacement. I left the cabin, the tower, all of it. I reported what happened, but they didn't believe me. They said it was isolation, stress, maybe mild hypothermia. But I know what I heard. I know what was in that tower, and I'm never going back. I was 28 and working as a traveling nurse. My company sent me to rural areas, places that didn't have enough permanent staff. It meant a lot of driving and a lot of temporary housing, but the pay was good, and I didn't mind the change of scenery. This assignment was in North Dakota, a small town called Medina. Population maybe 300. The clinic there needed someone to cover for a nurse who was out on maternity leave. They put me up in a farmhouse about 5 miles outside of town. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Crenshaw, had moved to an assisted living facility, and the house was empty. The clinic arranged for me to stay there, said it would be more comfortable than a motel. The house was old but well-maintained, a 2-story structure with white clapboard siding and a big front porch. It sat alone on a flat stretch of land, surrounded by empty fields. The nearest neighbor was miles away. I moved in on a Sunday. The house was clean, furnished with old but sturdy furniture. There was a wood stove in the living room, and the kitchen had everything I needed. It felt cozy, welcoming. I unpacked my things and settled in, looking forward to a quiet month. The storm hit on Wednesday. The forecast had been calling for snow, but nothing like what we got. By evening, the wind was howling, and the snow was coming down so hard I couldn't see the barn 50 feet away. The power went out around 8. I lit some candles, stoked the fire in the wood stove, and made myself comfortable on the couch with a book. Around 10, I heard a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and clear. I was surprised. No one should have been out in this weather. No answer. I looked through the peephole. There was a woman standing on the porch. She was young, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair and a pale face. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin dress. She looked freezing. I opened the door. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer, just stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Then she turned and walked off the porch, disappearing into the storm. I called after her, but she was gone. I grabbed my coat and a flashlight and went outside. The wind nearly knocked me over. I swept the flashlight across the yard, but there was no sign of her, no footprints in the snow. Nothing. I went back inside, shaken. I locked the door and sat by the fire, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe she was a neighbor, disoriented by the cold. Maybe I should call someone, but my phone had no signal, and the landline was dead. I was completely cut off. An hour later, I heard the knock again. Same pattern. 3 sharp raps. I went to the door but didn't open it. Silence. I looked through the peephole. The woman was back, standing in the same spot, wearing the same dress. This time, her lips were moving. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to hear. Her voice was faint, barely audible over the wind. "Let me in, please." I didn't open the door. Something about her felt wrong. The way she stood so still, the way her eyes didn't blink. I backed away and returned to the living room. The knocking continued, rhythmic and insistent. 3 raps, a pause, 3 more raps, over and over. I tried to ignore it, but it went on for hours. Around 2 in the morning, the knocking stopped. The house fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. I must have dozed off because I woke suddenly to the sound of footsteps. They were coming from upstairs, slow, deliberate, moving from room to room. I grabbed a poker from the fireplace and crept to the stairs. The steps creaked as I climbed. At the top, the hallway was dark. I could see 3 doors, all closed. The footsteps had stopped. I opened the first door. It was a bedroom, empty. The second door, a bathroom, also empty. The third door was at the end of the hall. I reached for the handle, and it was ice cold. I turned it slowly and pushed the door open. The room beyond was freezing, colder than the rest of the house. The window was wide open, snow blowing in, and standing in the corner, facing the wall, was the woman. She turned slowly, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. Her skin was blue, her lips cracked and frozen. Her eyes were clouded over, lifeless. She opened her mouth, and a sound came out, a low, keening wail that made my blood run cold. I slammed the door and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, in my car, engine running. I drove through the storm, hands shaking, until I reached town. I never went back to that house. The clinic found me a motel room for the rest of my stay. When I told them what happened, they didn't believe me. But when they sent someone to check on the house, they found the upstairs window open, the room covered in snow. I was 33 and driving a long-haul route from Fargo to Bismarck. I'd been doing it for years, knew every truck stop, every diner, every stretch of bad road. Winter runs were always challenging, but the pay was better, and I didn't mind the cold. This trip started normal enough. Clear skies, light traffic, nothing to worry about. But by the time I was halfway through, the weather turned. The storm came out of nowhere, a massive system that rolled in fast and hit hard. Within minutes, the highway was covered in snow and visibility dropped to almost nothing. I slowed down, turned on my hazards, and kept going. I'd driven through worse. But then the radio started acting up. Static, broken voices, nothing clear. I tried switching channels, but it was the same on everyone. Just noise. Then I saw them, a line of trucks ahead of me, their taillights glowing red through the snow. At least a dozen of them moving slowly in a tight convoy. I fell in behind them, grateful for the company. It's always easier to drive in bad weather when you're not alone. But something felt off. The trucks were old, older than anything you'd see on the road today, and they all looked identical. Same make, same model, like they'd rolled off the assembly line together. I tried to raise them on the CB. "This is westbound Willie. Anyone out there?" Nothing. Just static. I stayed behind them, following their lights. But the longer I drove, the stranger things got. The convoy never slowed down, never sped up. They maintained the exact same speed, the exact same distance between vehicles, and there were no markers on the trucks, no company logos, no license plates. After about an hour, the lead truck's brake lights flashed. The convoy was pulling off the highway onto a side road. I hesitated. I didn't know where that road led, and every instinct told me to stay on the highway. But the storm was getting worse, and I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. I figured the convoy knew something I didn't, maybe a shortcut or a place to wait out the storm. So I followed. The side road was narrow, barely wide enough for one truck. Trees pressed in on both sides, branches scraping against my trailer. The convoy moved steadily ahead, their lights cutting through the darkness. We drove for miles, deeper and deeper into the woods. No signs, no landmarks, nothing to indicate where we were. Then the convoy stopped. All at once, every truck came to a halt. I stopped too, engine idling, waiting. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. I tried the CB again. "Hey, what's going on? Why'd we stop?" Silence. I opened my door and climbed down. The cold was brutal and the wind howled through the trees. I walked up to the truck ahead of me. The cab was empty. No driver, no keys in the ignition, just an empty seat. I checked the next truck. Same thing. Empty. I moved down the line, checking each one. They were all empty. Every single truck, but the engines were running, exhaust puffing into the cold air. I stood there in the middle of that convoy, snow falling all around me, and felt a terror I'd never experienced before. I ran back to my truck, climbed in, and tried to turn around. But the road was too narrow, and the trees too close. I couldn't move. That's when I saw it. In my side mirror, a figure was walking toward me from the back of the convoy. Tall, wearing a dark coat, moving with a slow, deliberate stride. I hit the gas, forcing my truck forward, pushing through the snow. The convoy parted, trucks rolling aside like they were on rails. I drove through them, away from that figure, away from that cursed road. I didn't stop until I reached the highway. When I looked back, the side road was gone, just an unbroken wall of trees. I reported what happened, but no one believed me. They said I must have gotten turned around in the storm, confused. But I know what I saw. And I'll never follow another convoy again. I was 25, and working at a ski lodge in the mountains of Colorado. It was my second season there, and I loved the job. The work was hard, long hours and freezing conditions, but the people were great and the scenery was breathtaking. The lodge itself was a beautiful old building, all dark wood and stone fireplaces, perched on the side of a mountain with views that stretched for miles. That winter, we had a massive storm. It started snowing on a Friday and didn't stop for 3 days. The lifts shut down, the roads closed, and everyone who'd been staying at the lodge got snowed in. We had about 30 guests, plus the staff. It should have been fine. We had food, power, and plenty of firewood. But things started going wrong almost immediately. On the first night, one of the guests disappeared. A woman named Karen, mid-40s, traveling alone. She'd gone to her room after dinner and never came back. We searched the entire lodge, every room, every closet. Nothing. Her room was empty, her belongings still there. But she was gone. We checked the security cameras. They showed her walking down the hallway toward her room, but she never arrived, just vanished somewhere between the dining room and her door. The next morning, another guest went missing. An older man this time, a retiree named Bob. Same thing. He went to his room, and we never saw him again. The remaining guests started to panic. People were demanding we call for help, but the phones were down and there was no cell service. We were completely cut off. I was part of the staff team searching the building. We checked every inch of that lodge. Basement, attic, storage rooms, everything. We found nothing, but in the attic, we did find something strange. Scratches on the walls, deep gouges in the wood, like something had been clawing at them, and writing, scrawled in what looked like charcoal. It's in the walls. That night, I was assigned to guard duty. Me and another staff member, a guy named Tyler, were supposed to patrol the hallways and make sure everyone stayed in their rooms. Around 2 a.m, we heard a sound. A low, rhythmic thumping coming from behind the walls. We followed it to the 3rd floor, to a section of the lodge that was closed for renovations. The thumping was louder there, echoing through the empty hallways. We found a door, partially hidden behind a tarp. It led to a narrow staircase going down. Tyler and I looked at each other, neither of us wanting to go first, but we had to check. We descended slowly, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The stairs led to a tunnel, brick-lined and damp. The thumping was louder now, coming from somewhere ahead. We followed the tunnel until it opened into a large room. It was some kind of storage area, filled with old furniture and boxes. In the center of the room was a well, covered by a wooden lid. The thumping was coming from inside the well. Tyler lifted the lid, and we shined our lights down. The well was deep, maybe 30 feet, and at the bottom we saw them. Karen and Bob, along with others. Bodies, some fresh, some old, piled at the bottom. And something else. A figure, hunched and pale, moving among them. We ran. We didn't look back, didn't stop until we reached the main lodge. We told the manager, and he called the sheriff as soon as the lines came back up. When they finally arrived, they found the tunnel and the well. The bodies were real, the figure was gone. They never found it. The lodge closed after that, never reopened. I left Colorado and never looked back. I was 30 and driving across Wyoming on my way to visit family in Cheyenne. It was January and the roads were icy, but I'd made the trip before and wasn't worried. My car was reliable and I had a full tank of gas. The highway was mostly empty, just a few scattered trucks and the occasional sedan. The landscape was bleak, flat and white, stretching endlessly in every direction. About an hour outside of Rawlins, my car started making a strange noise. A high-pitched whine coming from the engine. I pulled over and popped the hood. I'm not a mechanic, but I know enough to check the basics. Everything looked fine. The noise stopped, so I got back in and kept driving. 10 minutes later, the car died. Just shut off completely. No warning. I coasted to the shoulder and tried to restart it. Nothing. The engine wouldn't turn over. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course. I was in the middle of nowhere, no buildings in sight, no other cars on the road. I tried the radio, but all I got was static. I decided to walk. There had to be a town or a gas station somewhere ahead. I bundled up, grabbed my backpack, and started walking along the shoulder. The wind was brutal, cutting through my jacket and stinging my face. I walked for what felt like hours, but I couldn't see anything, just more empty highway, disappearing into the white. Then I saw a building. It was set back from the road, partially hidden by a snowdrift, a small structure, maybe an old rest stop or a maintenance shed. I hurried toward it. The door was unlocked. Inside it was warmer, though not by much. The building was empty, just one room with a concrete floor and a single window. There was a bench against one wall and a broken vending machine in the corner. I sat down, trying to warm up. That's when I noticed the smell. Something foul, like rotting meat. I looked around and saw a door at the back of the room. It was slightly ajar. I walked over and pushed it open. The smell was stronger now, overpowering. Beyond the door was a small room, dimly lit by a single bulb. In the center of the room was a table, and on the table was a body, a man, middle-aged, wearing a heavy coat. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't breathing. I backed away, my heart racing. I had to get out of there. But when I turned to leave, the front door was closed. I hadn't heard it close, but it was shut tight. I ran to it and tried to open it. It was locked. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but there was no one around. I was trapped. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the back room. I turned and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was tall, wearing a dark cloak, its face hidden in shadow. It didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I grabbed the vending machine and tried to use it to break the window, but the glass wouldn't budge. The figure started walking toward me, and I could hear its breath, raspy and uneven. I don't remember what happened next. I must have blacked out. When I woke up, I was outside, lying in the snow a few feet from the building. The door was open, swinging in the wind. I stumbled to my feet and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the highway. A truck driver picked me up and drove me to Rawlins. I told the police what happened, but when they went back to check, the building was gone. Just an empty lot. They never found the body. I was 34 and living in a small town in northern Minnesota, right on the edge of Leech Lake. I'd grown up there, knew the lake like the back of my hand. In the winter, ice fishing was the main pastime. You'd see dozens of shacks dotting the frozen surface, people sitting in the cold, waiting for a bite. I had my own shack, a small wooden structure I'd built myself. It wasn't much, but it kept the wind out and had a heater that worked most of the time. That winter was brutal, colder than usual, and the ice was thick, over 2 feet in some places. I'd been out on the lake a few times, but the fishing was slow. Not much biting. On this particular Saturday, I decided to give it one more try. I drove my truck out onto the ice, set up the shack, and drilled my holes. The sun was already low on the horizon, and the wind was picking up. I figured I'd stay for a couple of hours, then head back before dark. Around 4, I heard a knock on the door of my shack. I opened it and saw a man standing outside. He was older, maybe 60, with a long white beard and a heavy coat. He smiled and asked if I'd had any luck. I said no, and he nodded sympathetically. Then he asked if he could sit with me for a bit, said his shack was on the other side of the lake and he didn't feel like making the walk back just yet. I said sure and made room for him. We sat in silence for a while, lines in the water, waiting. Then he started talking. He told me he'd been fishing this lake for 40 years, knew every spot, every depth. He said the fishing used to be better, back before the lake changed. I asked what he meant, and he looked at me with these strange, distant eyes. He said the lake had taken something from him, something he couldn't get back. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. As the sun set, the temperature dropped, My heater struggled to keep up, and I could see my breath in the cold air. The old man didn't seem bothered by the cold. He just sat there, staring at his line. Then he said, "You should leave before it gets dark." I asked why, and he said, "The ice doesn't sleep." I didn't understand, but something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I started packing up my gear, ready to head back. That's when I heard it. A cracking sound, deep and resonant, coming from beneath the ice. The old man stood up and walked to the door. He looked back at me and said, "Too late." Then he stepped outside and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. The cracking got louder. I felt the ice shift beneath me. I grabbed my gear and ran for my truck, but before I could reach it, the ice gave way. I plunged into the freezing water, the cold hitting me like a hammer. I kicked and thrashed, trying to find the surface, but the current pulled me under. I could see light above, but I couldn't reach it. Then I felt something grab my leg, not a hand, something else. It pulled me down, deeper into the darkness. I don't know how I got out. Maybe the current shifted. Maybe I found a hole in the ice. All I know is I woke up on the shore, soaking wet and freezing. My truck was gone, along with my shack. The lake was smooth, unbroken ice. No sign of what had happened. I walked back to town, barely able to feel my legs. I never went back to that lake, and I never saw that old man again. I was 42 and driving a snowplow for the county. It was hard work, long shifts in brutal conditions, but it paid well, and I didn't mind being alone. That winter, we got hit with storm after storm, and I was pulling double shifts just to keep up. One night, I was assigned to clear a stretch of county road that ran through the woods. It was a remote area, hardly any traffic, but it had to be done. I started around midnight. The snow was coming down hard, and the wind was howling. My plow cut through the drifts, pushing the snow to the side. It was slow going, and I had to stop every few miles to clear the blade. Around 2 in the morning, I saw something in the road ahead. A car, sitting sideways, blocking both lanes. I slowed down and turned on my spotlight. The car was empty, doors open, engine off. I got out to check. The car was cold, no sign of anyone inside or nearby. I radioed dispatch, but they said there were no reports of abandoned vehicles. They told me to push it to the side and keep going. I hooked up the tow chain and dragged the car off the road. That's when I saw the footprints. They led from the car into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I should have left it alone, but something made me follow them. I grabbed my flashlight and walked into the trees. The footprints were fresh. Clear in the snow, they led deeper and deeper, winding between the pines. Then they stopped, just ended in the middle of a clearing. No sign of where the person went, but in the center of the clearing was a pile of clothes, a coat, boots, gloves, all neatly stacked, and sitting on top of them was a note. It said, "I'm sorry." I heard a sound behind me, a low growl, deep and guttural. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The growling got louder, coming from all around me. I ran, crashing through the trees, my flashlight bouncing wildly. I made it back to the plow and climbed in, locking the doors. The growling stopped. I sat there, breathing hard, trying to calm down. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the trees, tall and thin, with glowing eyes. It just stood there, watching me. I hit the gas and drove, the plow scraping against the asphalt. I didn't stop until I reached town. When I told my supervisor what happened, he didn't believe me, but he sent someone out to check the next day. They found the car, but no clothes, no note, just tire tracks leading into the woods. I quit the next week. Some things you don't come back from. Some say it ended that night, but I still wake up thinking about those roads, those faces in the snow. Thanks for listening. If you made it through the darkness, you're braver than most.